Courage is contagious, and we want to see it spread like wildfire in our nation. Welcome back to the Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous in your daily life. So glad you're here. Please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm very pleased to welcome our next guest to the show. We'll be right back.
The fight for medical freedom is far from over. Despite hard-fought victories, the battle against overreach and coercion rages on. There is much work left to be done. This September, in Dallas, Texas, the brightest minds in science, medicine, and policy unite for a critically important summit, an imperative gathering for our freedom and civil liberties. These leading experts, patriots of truth and reason, gather to defend the cornerstone of our nation, the right to choose. This is more than a conference. It's a call to action. Every voice, every idea, every courageous insight will help fuel the momentum America needs. Come listen and learn about what lies ahead for the country and what needs to happen in order to secure a future where our freedom prevails. Join us on September 27th, in person or online. Freedom Summit 2025. Reserve your spot today.
Deb Conrad is a dedicated physician assistant with years of experience in clinical practice in the New York area. She became nationally recognized for her stand on reporting vaccine adverse events during the COVID-19 pandemic. When she noticed a rise in potential vaccine-related complications among her patients, she fulfilled her legal obligation to report these incidents to the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, known as VAERS. She was fired, after being accused of over-reporting to the VAERS system and spreading vaccine misinformation. Yet she maintained that her actions were rooted in her duty to protect patients and uphold transparency in healthcare and comply with the law. Her experience brought national attention to the importance of accurate adverse event reporting. Through public speaking, media engagement, and ongoing legal efforts, she continues to champion the rights of patients and healthcare professionals to speak out about safety concerns without fear of retaliation. Motivated by a deep sense of responsibility and compassion, her courage and integrity have inspired many. I'm very pleased to call her one of my friends. She remains committed to fostering an environment where every patient's voice is heard and every concern is addressed with honesty and excellent care. I'm very pleased to bring out my friend, physician assistant, Deb Conrad.
Thank you for having me.
So we told the audience a little bit about you, but it's always best if people can hear in their own words, in your own words, just a little bit about yourself, how you and I, came to know each other in this medical freedom fight, and then where we are today. So if you just let people know in your own words, a little bit about you.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a physician assistant. I've been a physician assistant since 2003, and most of my career I worked in the hospital setting, in the inpatient setting. And I was also, for about 10 years of my career, I also was in a leadership position in the hospital, being the first non-physician to sit on the medical executive board, and also to help to obtain kind of voting rights for non-physicians in the hospital, specifically for nurse practitioners and PAs. And in that leadership role, I also worked on policy changes in the hospital and, just making sure that the PAs and the NPs were heard and they had a voice and all of that. And I was, well respected in my position, well respected in my field and at my hospital that I'd been employed at for about 15 years. And then the pandemic came, and I worked the whole COVID pandemic before the vaccines came out. And then obviously I was still there after the vaccines came out. And I want your listeners to know, when I say vaccine, I know that the COVID, we don't like to call the COVID vaccines, and I don't like to either. But so I guess I could refer them to COVID shots but when I say vaccine, please know that I don't also believe that these are vaccines. So basically, when they came out, I started noticing right away some unusual things, and the patients themselves started telling me something is wrong with them since they took this injection. And because I was seeing it so often, certainly people in the hospital started talking about the unusual things we were seeing. And I went and started doing my own research. Like I kind of did my whole career and discovered that we were supposed to be reporting these unusual and weird kind of side effects that were going on that we were seeing to the vaccine adverse event reporting system.
So I'm
And
just
so
gonna
I start, yeah, mhm,
I'm gonna pause you right there because it's a lot for our listeners, and I want
yeah,
them to draw the parallels between what you went through and what I went through. So a couple of things you said. First of all, you had this long established, well-respected career. You had no problems, you had no conflicts, other than maybe normal day-to-day, whatever people go through. And in fact, had achieved a very high level of respect. And I want to share with the audience, it's not so easy for a physician assistant to get a leadership position in a system that's dominated by physicians. So, really the most exceptional ones are the ones that are picked out for that. So that is Deb Conrad. And you also just said that, you're practicing, you're doing your work professionally. And in my case, when I was on the front lines treating patients, I started getting very curious about the treatments. You started
mhm,
getting very curious when you were seeing these vaccine reactions. And both of us just applied our own intellect, training, education, and curiosity to what's going on here. And I just want to point that out to everybody because everybody has that obligation in their own life, not just to quote unquote follow orders or do what everybody else is doing, but to use whatever gifts you've been given in a professional or personal capacity to push the needle, push the envelope, like figure it out for yourself. Like don't always just rely on other people. So that's really where you started. You're like, you're just noticing this. That's
yeah,
really important.
you're absolutely right. Even looking back when I was taking care of COVID patients before the vaccines came out, like you, I was questioning just why are we not treating these people in the outpatient setting? Why are we waiting till they come to the hospital to finally offer them treatment? And I also noticed some unusual things then too, like when I tried to prescribe vitamin D in the hospital or vitamin C, God forbid, it was like the pharmacy came all over me. And I said, what is the big deal? Well, there's no literature showing that it helps. And I said, well, there isn't any that shows that it doesn't. And we don't know what we're doing right now. So why not try to improve their immune system? What's the big deal? But it was like every time you questioned anything to try something different or new, it was like, nope, you must stick with the narrative. And I remember I was like, something's not right here, but never to the point that I thought there was some sort of nefarious behavior going on or anything like that. But as the pandemic started going and I started getting way more and more comfortable with the masks, with the intubations, and what we were doing to these people. So I kind of set me up, I think, for when the vaccines came out, that I was already very skeptical of what was going on, for sure.
Yeah, and
Um,
exactly. So
yeah.
vitamins, the hospitals were coming down on vitamins. I had a similar experience, and like you, I didn't know how deep it would go. I was just you were fighting them off, in my case, on, like, one-off basis. This one patient, I remembered in the hospital, I tried to prescribe ivermectin, and I was met with such a wall of resistance, you would have thought I was prescribing heroin. I mean, it was just so over the top. It was absurd. So that's super interesting. And, like you, by the way, or I'm assuming like you, I actually didn't even know, had never heard of VAERS vaccine, the VAERS, which I'll let you explain. But like you, this wasn't my lane. This wasn't something I was focused on. I'd never even heard of it. So there you are finding this
Mhm.
out.
Yep, correct. And so I started doing my own research on what this vaccine adverse event reporting system is, and I started reading about the emergency use authorizations and what that meant. And I kept noticing on the VAERS website that it kept saying healthcare workers are required by law to report these serious adverse events to the VAERS system. And the serious adverse events included death, inpatient hospitalization, COVID-19 infection requiring hospitalization, any kind of miscarriage or birth, related defects, any kind of like heart defects or heart injury like myo or pericarditis. These were all things that I was seeing in the hospital. And I said, well, geez, it's right there. We're supposed to be reporting these things because these are under experimental emergency use. And we need to give the powers that be the information they need to either keep these things on the market or not, because they're brand new, using novel technology we hadn't used in a vaccine type format before. And so to me, it was just so common sense. I mean, no different than I've ever acted my whole career. And so I went to my colleagues and my other colleagues in leadership, and I said, hey guys, did you know about this? Because I didn't. And we really need to start implementing a policy to make sure that these reports get filed and whatnot. And initially, my higher leadership, kept saying, well, Deb, no one else is really seeing this, but if you want to do it, we're fine. And so I think they thought that it was only going to be a couple of patients, maybe here and there. And it ended up turning out to be a significant number. I remember one of the months I reported over 50 patients. And keep in mind, I tell people I only worked 2 weeks of the month because I did a 7 on, 7 off schedule. So in 2 weeks, I had over 50 reports done. And these are only either my patients or patients that a provider who knew what I was doing gave to me to report. That's a lot of people. We're a small community hospital. We're not like some massive institution. So these are people that would be admitted to our small hospital. A lot of things got transferred and I didn't know about them. So that's a lot of people in a very short time frame. And so because it was so overwhelming and my 2 weeks off, I was doing nothing but filing these reports, which sometimes can be up to an hour a piece. I went back to leadership and I just kept pressing the issue and saying, I can't be the only one doing this. Everyone needs to pitch in. This is a group effort where healthcare workers, this is what we're supposed to be doing, just like a child abuse report would be. And what happened then is my complaints and concerns got escalated up to the system level because Rochester Regional Health encompasses 9 hospitals and multiple clinics and, nursing homes and a whole bunch of things. So this escalated to the system level. And once that happened is when everything changed for me. So I was met with an audit. I was told that basically no one else in the entire system is seeing this that you're seeing. So here comes the gaslighting and you're crazy and all that stuff. And so I gave them patients that met the exact criteria for which VAERS said we must report per the law, per the EUA requirements and the program participation requirements, which I'll bring up in a minute. And I don't know who did the audit. I have no idea because I never got any feedback on it. But ultimately, they came back and said, we looked at things and you are over reporting. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. And as a result, you can no longer report on any patients that come to your attention other than those that you directly took care of. Which is kind of interesting because as a hospitalist, all of the patients in the hospital are under my care, right? I mean, because if a code gets called, I'm not going to say, oh, that's not my patient. I'm just going to sit here. No, you go because that's your role as a hospitalist. So I found it very interesting that they said they were not under my care because I think if I remember, I was kind of snarky with them about it because I said, okay, so that means if they code, I'm just going to sit here, right? Because you're not under my care.
Wow.
It's just insane, right? It's insane. So after that happened, I said, well, okay, if you're not going to let me report on all these other patients, who's going to do it? And they said, well, it's the provider's job and they're supposed to educate themselves. We're not going to educate them on what they're supposed to do.
Wow.
And basically, if you're going to talk about it, we're going to report you for spreading misinformation. Right? It got so bad. And I said, well, we're required by law. I can't allow this to happen because if I know you're not reporting these patients, if I know that it's happening and I don't do something about it, I'm also part of the crime, right? I'm part of the fraud. So I just couldn't sit by and allow this to happen. So I just kept pressing the issue and trying to educate my fellow colleagues. And I kept getting pulled into the office, right? And getting reprimanded. And then I had one meeting where they threatened to report me to the New York State Board of Professional Misconduct for spreading misinformation. And this is the interesting thing is just a few months prior to that, I was nominated by my New York State Physician Assistant Society for a seat on the board for professional misconduct in New York. So here, it's just insane. And I also received I was the first non-physician to receive a Physician Excellence Award of the Year from Rochester Regional Health, right? This was just a few months prior to this, for all my excellent and exemplary service, and here my state PA society feels I'm such a, advocate for PAs and such a good provider that they want me to sit on the board for professional misconduct. And then they're turning around, my hospital system then a few months later is wanting to report me for spreading misinformation. And it's insane, right? I mean, uh, I don't know, just because I was reporting side effects or whatever they were, because we're not supposed to say that we're determining if the vaccine caused the event. We're just inputting data, right?
Right.
The whole thing that I think a lot of my colleagues didn't understand is it's irrespective of causality.
Yeah.
And it's right on the website. It doesn't, your job, our job is not to
Exactly.
determine if there's a cause and effect. We're just supposed to input data. Similar to, I always use the child abuse reporting. When we have a suspected, child abuse case, we're not there to say it's happening or not. We're just reporting it to the powers that be. They take on the investigation.
There's many layers, and that's the thing with science, is there's many layers of investigation for science. Like, if you open up a journal, there might be a case report. A case report is not the same as a randomized controlled trial, for example, right? Sorry about that. So, yeah, and so it's just the first step really is to put the data out there. So the powers that be are actually blocking the raw numbers, the raw data. We know, and you've learned, and but maybe everybody doesn't know, that the numbers of people who report vaccine adverse events at most is 10% of the total number. So it's probably a whole lot less because you are actually serving as a witness to active suppression of reporting the raw numbers, the raw data. And I just want to emphasize, because you're too modest and you've said it like it is, but I'm just going to tell the audience, like, PA Deb Conrad is really the best of the best. So if you start taking out the best of the best, you're really just left with a bunch of mediocre, people. So she's achieved unbelievable success as a physician assistant. I've actually never heard of a physician assistant being nominated for a physician excellence award. I would actually be in favor of that, because at the end of the day, it's not exactly where you begin your training that's the issue. It's how you're ending up the training, right? So it is true that physicians in the beginning do have more years of training than a physician assistant and a nurse practitioner. So historically, we, like, as a doctor, like to think that we're the best and we're the most, right? But I've observed over my career that as time goes on, it really depends upon the effort that that professional is putting into their training, and their curiosity probably is one of the most important factors. So actually, I'm glad that your hospital, was it a hospital, the regional center, who acknowledged you, sent you as a physician, and that at Gold Care I do the same thing. I often will say doctor when I'm just talking about a healer. Somebody's a healer. So I just want to give you props on, like, all of those things. So there you are. You really like the best of the best, right? You're one of the best in your field, and you're like, listen to me, listen to me. And they're not letting you. So tell us from the,
Right.
like, a personal perspective. So there you are. It's 2021, and you're getting all these hassles by your employment. Were you worried? Were you scared for yourself? Like, how did your brain go?
Yeah, after that audit happened, I remember saying to myself, I'm in trouble here. This isn't just about some simple, I'm being gaslit over some very there's some suppression, like true suppression of information for whatever motive, right? I had one recording where we talked about me towing the company line, where my chief medical officer said, Deb, we're basically employees of an organization, and our job is kind of to toe the company line. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't care. I don't care about the company line. We're talking about experimenting on human beings here. This is an experimental vaccine. At that stage, this was an experimental vaccine. It was not FDA approved. And I'm not comfortable with, if I'm seeing scary things go on and unusual things that I'd never seen before in my career, and the patients are telling you something's wrong, I need to report this. There's that, because that's what we do, right? It's so crazy. I mean, every day in the hospital, we had this safety report. So every day, and I think it was 11 o'clock, one of us would go down from our representative departments and report the safety issues for today. And yet we've got this huge red flag safety issue and nobody cares. And in fact, they want to suppress me.
Yeah.
It's insane. So I just kept saying, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. Whatever happens to me, I cannot allow this to happen because I couldn't have that on my conscience. Like my job and role as a leader and as a healthcare worker is to first do no harm. That's first and foremost of any
You,
paycheck.
you and I found ourselves in
And
the same,
yeah,
you and I found ourselves in the same positions, which is you just form a line. You're like, I don't care. Like, there's no way I'm doing something that's ethically wrong, morally wrong. I want to also point out a side issue, which you probably thought about. Um, Towing the company line, people always ask me how this happened, why this happened, and one of the reasons is because doctors, physician assistants, were really mostly employees of a big corporate entity. Now, you didn't know in 2021, like, what were the forces that be that were saying all these things, but at the end of the day, you're an employee, like, you're getting a paycheck. And so in my dad's day, right, that wasn't the case. My father was essentially a small business owner working really just for the patients. Patients paid him. So I just want to point that out to the American people that that's a system-wide problem. When you have a very important job, all jobs are important, but the job of a healthcare worker is also to contribute to the betterment of everybody, right? Because the healthcare worker is on the front lines to see things before an average person who's not in the healthcare space would see it. And if you're going to make healthcare workers beholden to a corporate paycheck, you're actually not going to get the data that the corporation doesn't want you to get. I'm not saying it was Rochester Regional Medical Center that was in charge of it. In my case, the hospital did the exact same thing to me, Deb, the exact same thing. They sat me down. We worked for the company. I don't really talk about that aspect of it as much, but that's exactly what it was. No, I don't think the hospital I was working for was particularly evil. They were responding, in my case, to pressure from Medicare. I know that for sure. I found that out later. It was, my situation was slightly different. But I just want to point that out for everybody. That's quite dangerous to have 85, 95% of our healthcare workers be responsible to a corporation. Analogously, that's what we see in the pharmacies. There's virtually no, there's hardly any pharmacists that are independent. I mean, it's less than 5% if I had to guess. So even when you could find a doctor who was willing to do, like Deb Conrad, the right thing for the patient, and it was an outpatient setting, that patient needed to go to a pharmacy, and you only had people working for corporate chains. So I'm just pointing that out. System wide, it's
that's
a
a
problem.
really good point. It's a really good point because in my age, where I'm at in my age group, I started my career in an independent type practice before hospitalist became a thing, you know? So I guess you're right in the sense that I never put two and two together and realize, look, I'm working for an organization now. Like I just nothing ever changed with me as far as how I viewed the patient or my job or anything. And I think maybe it is because I started out in the
Exactly.
old school
That's,
style, you
and
know?
by the way, I see there's a lot of fun things to talk about. So many of the people that came to the medical freedom side were of a specific age. I had no expectations when I started frontline doctors, right? But it turned out people were basically mid 40s to mid 50s because they had had 20 years in the healthcare system. They had enough time, just like you, where they went from
Mhm.
independent to not independent, but they themselves didn't change. It was the same thing as me. I didn't change. My behavior didn't change. It didn't really matter where the paycheck was coming from. But the reality was there was now a pressure that grabbed you, that hold you if they wanted it to. And think of that going forward. There could be if you're always working for a corporate entity, that corporate entity can close the spigot. I mean, that's common sense. So I just want to point out that I think it's quite dangerous for society to have centralization, really, probably of almost all industries. It's quite risky because you can have a choke point in any industry. But our choke points were the prescribers and the pharmacists. So the prescribers had to keep their jobs, and the pharmacists were working for big corporate chains. So I just want to point that out. It's just an important feature. It's not the only feature, but it's a really important feature.
Mhm. It's very true. Yeah. So, I mean, what ended up ultimately happening is probably midway through after that audit happened, and I realized that, again, this is probably going to end badly, you know, in the sense that I'm going to lose my job. I ended up securing an attorney firm, kind of behind the scenes that helped to support me um, as I was still employed. So, because what ended up happening is I started just escalating this more public in the sense that I notified when I couldn't get anywhere with the hospital, I then went to like the New York State Department of Health, and I spoke with them about what was going on, and then I escalated it up to the CDC, the FDA, and things like that. And I said, well, if I have an attorney helping me and writing legal letters, maybe I'll, have a little bit more backing. So Aaron Siri and Elizabeth Brem were two attorneys that worked with me through the Siri and Gilmstead law firm. And they wrote some legal letters in support of what was going on at the hospital and addressed them to all the big players at the CDC and the FDA at the time. And unfortunately, we didn't hear anything back. Again, I'm not surprised, but we didn't. So, again, I just kept trying to reach someone to make them understand what was going on, because I was seeing people getting harmed and I couldn't stand it. So, when then the mandates started coming down, I want to say there was talk about them, if I remember, over the summer of 21, and that we were going to have to get vaccinated in order to keep our jobs. At that time, they allowed a religious exemption in New York State, so I obtained and secured a religious exemption. It was approved, and shortly thereafter, the New York Times heard about me and asked to do an interview with me, more about the mandates, because at that time I had another attorney that was fighting all of the mandates in New York State, and so I kind of joined his cause. So in that interview with the New York Times, they asked me, if I was going to get vaccinated or what was going to happen to me, and I said no, because I'm seeing all of these problems with these vaccines. And then shortly thereafter, I flew to Austin, Texas, and I went on the high wire with Del Bigtree and basically disclosed to the public what was going on at the hospital and all the things that were happening. And that interview, I think, helped a lot of people validate people that what they had experienced after vaccination, or other providers that were seeing things, that there's other people seeing it too. But after that interview, it was about a week and a half later. Again, I kind of knew something was going to fall out from that, but I ended up coming back from lunch at work one day, and I sat down at my workstation to start my afternoon discharges, and I was surrounded by our HR department on the busiest floor of the hospital, in front of all the staff. And basically they said, grab your things, come with us. And they brought me into a room and interrogated me for about 15 minutes or so, asking me about the interview I did, and asking me, because I had a GoFundMe at that time that I had opened up, because again, I knew I was going to lose my job, and I was the breadwinner. My husband was a stay-at-home dad at the time, raising our 3 kids. So and they just asked me all those kinds of questions, and they said, well, are you going to walk out quietly, or are we going to have to walk you out? And I just remember looking at them like, what are you talking about? Are you people crazy? Like, I mean, what do you mean walk me out? Like, you're insane. What is the matter with you? And these are my friends. I mean, the people that interrogated me, these are people I've worked with and know very well. And I'm just looking at them like, are you in a trance? Are you insane? What's the matter with you? And I mean, I think because I was arguing back, and they just said, okay, well, we're going to walk her out because she's not calming down. And, I wasn't being ridiculous. I was just being like, what's the matter with you people?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a criminal. I'm not a bad person. I'm just reporting to an agency that we're required to report to. I mean, this is a federal law. This is a fraud issue. So I was going to bring up about the program participation agreement. So one of the things I knew about relatively early on is there's a contract that we signed as a healthcare organization, just like we do for any, when healthcare organizations become vaccination providers for, let's say, the childhood vaccine program, like the Medicaid VFC program. There's a program participation agreement for the COVID vaccines, but it was different. This was an emergency use agreement that was signed between the vaccinating organization and the CDC. And in this agreement, it said that as a condition of payment under the False Claims Act, you will assure that serious adverse events are reported as required. And all these laws were listed that is a material condition of payment. Meaning every time you administer a COVID vaccine to a patient, you're basically saying, I'm adhering to these rules. Well, they weren't, because they were firing me for reporting to the VAERS system, which they signed that they would, as an organization, assure anyone underneath them would report. So it's just insane. And
May I
yeah,
interrupt that? Because
absolutely.
your story, these issues are broader than what happened, and you are an example of things that can teach people. So we have a physician assistant here who's read the rules, and the rules require you to do X, Y, Z to get paid. And if you don't do that, you're committing fraud. And she says, I'm not going to participate in that because that would be fraud. Wasn't her that made up the rules. Deb didn't make up the rules that you have to report this. This is part of the rules for getting paid. I want to contrast. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but you know the doctor in Oregon, Dr. Kirk Moore, the
Mhm.
okay, so his situation was that during the pandemic, he he would not give people, the so-called vaccine. He kind of squirted it out, and he also said that they were vaccinated when they weren't vaccinated. So the government went after him hard for fraud. It's really the same thing. There are certain conditions that you have to comply with if you're doing things that the government is paying for. So in this case, the government is paying for the shots. They're giving the shots to the regional medical center. And in exchange, they have a few things you have to do. One of them is report side effects, which is true for everything. And in Dr. Moore's case, they're giving him the medicine. He's like, this is garbage. He's pushing it out. So they charge him for fraud, right? Which is technically true, right? It's technically true that, right? But in your case, you're actually following the rules to avoid fraud. Now, I want to point this out for a really important reason. It's really politicized. We live in a society where if the powers that be, in this case, the Department of Justice, wants to enforce some rules and not enforce other rules, it's a situation called selective prosecution. And that's tyranny at the end of the day. That's tyranny. Is you have 100,000 rules on the books, and we have more than that at the federal level. We have about 300,000. It comes down to who's going to enforce which rules. That's all it came down to. And I couldn't resist making that comparison because they went after him for fraud. And I've always said it doesn't matter what the person does. It just matters if they're complying with the elite, right? You went to great lengths not to do fraud. He committed fraud. Both of you were moral and ethical, but the government only went after, right? The one that disagreed. The government only went after the fraud that disagreed with their narrative. Anyway, I don't know if you've ever thought of those two comparisons.
No, but that's a really good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. It's
Selective
yeah.
prosecution, essentially. You were actually following the rules, but the system didn't want you to follow the rules. The system wanted to brush the rules under the rug. So I bring it up because it almost didn't matter what a person did. It only mattered if you went along with the powerful people. People were very fond of saying, "Oh, are you a doctor?" To people who were pushing back. You'd have a mom who has had a vaccine in her child, or a mom that didn't want to go on the transgender stuff, and they'd say, are you an expert? And if you weren't an expert, they mocked your opinion. And I like to remind people, it's not true that because you're not an expert, they literally mocked me, and I have 2 doctorate degrees. So I'm pointing out for people that it's not really true when they try to say that you shouldn't believe something because you're not smart enough, educated enough. That's not your job. That's not your role. That's not this. People are just enforcing the rules that they want to enforce. I mean, you literally, Deb, were the only one in your environment that wasn't breaking the regulation.
Mhm.
They went after
Mhm.
you. It's like an
Yeah.
amazingly important story. And I wanted to point that out, that
Right.
committing fraud or not committing fraud landed 2 righteous healthcare providers in the exact same boat where both were being attacked, and one followed the rules and one didn't follow the rules. Obviously, it wasn't the following the rules that mattered. It was going along with the narrative that mattered. Thank you I didn't mean to, I
No,
just,
that is a really
fraud.
good point.
Yeah.
That is a really good point. It is. It's so frustrating when I look back, and even again, the providers that stayed behind that knew what was going on. Even after I left, and even while I was there, many of them didn't file the VAERS reports either because. Again, the system itself is just so broken. The VAERS filing system, it's designed to not have people report. It really is. I mean, and to me that's a whole part of this, when we talk about policy change and what my motivations are to again pursue my justice, I guess. that we're actively trying to pursue. It's policy change, because to me, we talk about how we've lost faith in vaccines, right? We have more anti-vaxxers now than we ever did, and no one trusts the government and yada, yada. Well, if we're going to restore trust, like the current administration is saying, our job, we want to restore trust in our healthcare agencies. Well, in order to do that, we have to have transparency, and we have to fix what's broken. And if we're not going to fix what's broken, no one's going to trust you, right? I mean, I don't know. I feel like this VAERS system in my case is so incredibly important, because if we can fix this, we can restore some trust in vaccines. Otherwise, I have no trust in vaccines, because if you're not going to enforce the safety reporting when someone has a problem, how can I trust that any of this stuff
So
is
let's
safe?
talk about two things, because I know you want to get it out. Let's talk about just a few minutes on exactly what's wrong with the VAERS system. And then I do want to talk about the stage you're at, with your lawsuit and how you fought back. So let's do both. So if you want to just start maybe with the VAERS system.
Yeah, so for one, the education of the healthcare workers, there is none, right? Is when you think about our respective training, we had courses and courses on pharmacology and side effects related to ACE inhibitors and beta blockers and all sorts of things. But when you think about your immunologic training, when we learned about vaccines, I don't know about you, but I don't remember ever hearing anything about side effects. And any side effect, when I think about vaccines in general before the COVIDs, what did I know or think that might be related to a vaccine? Guillain-Barré is one, and then probably Bell's palsy is another. That's it. I didn't give out childhood vaccines, so I didn't really have any sort of understanding of that. But for the flu vaccine, I always thought, oh, Guillain-Barré and Bell's palsy. Those are the two things. But even with that knowledge, I never knew of VAERS. It was never taught to me. I had no idea. I had never filed a VAERS report prior to 2021. And now I filed hundreds and hundreds of reports, because so that's one of the things that's wrong with the system. The other part of it is, in today's society, in 2025, you would think, again, this is a government run website, that it would be more efficient. It's embarrassing, truly. If you've ever gone on the VAERS website, it is truly embarrassing. When you try to file a report, the system will freeze on you. You can't go back. It'll all kinds of weird things go on. It kicks you out if you don't, if you take too much time. It's just so insane. And I just said, really? You're talking about the majority of these reports come from healthcare workers. They don't have time. They don't have time. And they like to say, the majority of the reports don't really come from healthcare workers. They come from patients themselves. That's total BS. Patients have no clue how to answer some of those questions, because it's a very involved process. They ask you a ton of questions about lot numbers, where vaccinated, who's the best healthcare provider to contact, and they will contact you after you file a report. If you file a report that's a serious safety event, they will contact you after. So then I have one in my inbox now that they want medical records for a patient. Well, who's going to give those medical records? Your office staff? No, the healthcare worker has to do it. And where do they have time? Who's paying them? No one. So
Wow.
again, there's so many things that need to be fixed with this system. And again, let's face it, the government has all the data they need, right? It's very easy. They have all the Medicare, Medicaid data. They know who got vaccinated. They know who got hospitalized. You can just pull it from the billing.
It's funny. I'm very much into efficiency. Like, even getting the lot number, like, even that's kind of challenging. The reason it's interesting is because the healthcare workers really only at one place. Regional medical center, it's not as though you didn't have a similarity with the lot numbers, right? And
Right.
they all came, right. I know. They
Yeah.
made
So I mean,
you wonder
this
if it's on
system could
purpose,
be
like
very
how
easy.
difficult it was.
Yeah. This system could be easily fixed, and it needs to be, because again, if we're going to enforce reporting and we want to restore trust, we have to fix the system and make it more efficient and easy to navigate for the healthcare workers that are going to be reporting. And we have to educate our staff on, it has to be part of policy, and in our respective training, that vaccines can have side effects, and this is what you need to do as a provider once you work out there in the field. But none of that is done. I mean, I know why. But
So sorry.
it's
So anyway, I just want to wrap up that portion of it just to validate also, I never heard of VAERS. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know, which is actually outrageous because what you, at the very beginning you were saying, um, anytime there's a safety, you having a safety meeting like every day. That was just like your hospital standard every day. We did too. Like if there was a fall out of beds, foods like you would be
yep.
talking every day about the risk management of it all. And in my career, I'd worked on that as well. And it was a running kind of status report with the staff. And it's so bizarre to have left this out of that. And
Mhm.
it feels like leaving bears out is also purposeful, not gathering data. So great. Thank you for sharing with people how hard and time consuming it is to comply with bears and how difficult. And it's just really frustrating, right? The system is freezing up on you. So that's
Mhm.
problem one. So there you are. You kind of knew the axe was going to fall. So you're getting ready. You get walked out of the hospital, and is that when you started like getting decide to bring a lawsuit on this issue, or how did that decision come about in your own mind?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously when I was walked out, I had been, collecting a lot of evidence, a lot of information. But I not having a legal understanding of all I know is that there was fraud being committed. I was witness to it. There's thousands of patients, that this is happening to. So, but I didn't know the legal framework of what I could do with it. And at the time, the law firm that was working with me, they did not have a false claims attorney in the firm. So false claims was not something that they did. So it really wasn't anything that they could help me with, nor did they have a legal framework. Because again, no one has ever tried this before. This is the first case in history to do
Ah,
this. So so I just started calling law firms. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, but I'm like, look, this is what happened to me. Click. A lot of times people would not call me back. I couldn't get past the paralegals. I called multiple law firms, and this went on for well over a year after I was fired. And Steve Kirsch started coming to the forefront, and I started watching his Vaccine Safety Research Foundation podcast that he was doing. And he had, and I started hearing about the Brooke Jackson case and the whole Pfizer case that was going on. And she had Warner Mendenhall on as one of the attorneys. I'm sorry, Steve had Warner Mendenhall on with Brooke, um, talking about her case. And there was just something about Warner that struck me. And I just said, this guy seems to be a smart guy. He seems to get what's going on and isn't afraid to talk about it. So I'm going to call him. And so that's what I did. I emailed his firm and called the firm, and I said who I was, and I just said this is the story. And he called me back. He called me back personally. The attorney called me back, not a paralegal, an attorney. And he was like, okay, so tell me your story. And I told him, and he's like, well, look, you sound like you've got a really interesting case. I'm really interested in it. But he's like, I need some sort of document that links the hospital to some sort of crime, you know, you know. And I just said, well, I don't, what do you need? And he's like, I need some sort of signed paperwork. I need something that proves that they did a crime, something legally wrong. You can't just, he's like, I know that it's wrong to not report to VAERS, but we need to prove it that there's some sort of law they broke or there's some sort of fraud that they did. And at first I didn't understand what he needed because I had never done this before, right? So I started going through all of my evidence and I just said, what is he talking about? And I called him back and I'm like, look, it was late at night. It was maybe like 11 o'clock at night because he likes to call at night. And he's just like, Deb, I can't help you until you have this document. And I remember screaming on the phone, just saying, what document do you need? And I'm like, you talking about the program participation agreement? And he was like, stop right there. What is this? And I read the whole agreement. And when I said material condition of payment, he dropped the phone, started
so
screaming in the background. And he was like, oh my gosh, Deb, I can't believe you have this. And I'm like, I've had it all along. What are you talking
oh,
about? Like this? So that's how, so then he's like, look, I'll take your case. I understand a framework that we can work with. I've done this type of litigation. So that's how I ended up with Warner. And we filed the case in 2023, and it went under seal for a year, to allow the government to do some investigation. And they ultimately decided not to intervene. And so we ended up continuing the case along with me as the relator, representing the United States of America and the taxpayers. Um, filing a False Claims Act case against Rochester Regional Health. And it came off a seal, oh my goodness, a little over a year ago. And so then we went to court with the Honorable Judge Sinatra. And at our last hearing in March, ultimately we ended up surviving the motion to dismiss. So Rochester Regional Health, this is the second motion to dismiss that they asked for. He gave us the chance to amend our original complaint when we had our first hearing back in the fall of 2024. And so then we came back in March with our amended complaint. And it looked like it went well for us. And then a little over a month ago, we received the write-up from the judge that we survived the motion to dismiss. So we are moving forward into discovery with the first case in history to hold an institution accountable for not reporting to VAERS under an emergency use for the vaccines that they administered. And then the patient came back to a Rochester Regional Health facility for care. And those patients didn't get VAERS reports filed, and they were billed for, right? Because the Rochester Regional Health administered the vaccine, and then the patient came back to a Rochester Regional Health inpatient facility, whether it's the ER or the hospital, with a serious adverse event, and a VAERS report was not filed. So every case of that, every patient for which that happened is can be upwards of a $27,000 fine. And there are civil and criminal penalties attached.
I have to break this down. This is incredible. This is actually an amazing fact pattern. I understand why Warner, like, I totally get it. My legal hat, my lawyer hat is actually stoked about this. So you ended up, first of all, let's just stay at the top. Like, you ended up in this crazy position where you're not representing like the government in a essentially a taxpayer, I don't want to say scam, it's maybe too hard a word, but like the taxpayer pays money for these things and they sign a contract, they'll do these things and then they don't do these things. So it's the height of irony that you were like this beloved practitioner in this setting. And then you're blowing a whistle on your own former employer, which you wouldn't have really wanted to do, but they were not complying with the law. The reason this is so important, and your story is so fantastic for people, is it's not as, I'm just going to guess, it's not as though you thought Regional Medical Center was doing worse than maybe others. But if people don't start holding the guy on the front lines responsible, this just goes on. And I've said in the transgender medical mutilation surgeries, I said, you put 2 doctors in jail who are doing it, the whole industry will shut down. Like, that's it. So these examples, like, of somebody standing up and saying on the front lines, they didn't follow the rules or they did something wrong, amazingly important. And another thing that just made me chuckle is like how difficult it can be for doctors and lawyers to understand each other. I understand he absolutely needed like a legal premise to base it on. And I absolutely understand how that was an absolute bewildering question for you. It's as people have heard me say, like, I don't know who invented water, but it wasn't a fish. Like, it was all around you, like, too. It was like so obvious. You didn't even think to mention it. I totally get it. This is actually pretty exciting. And again, for the non-lawyers out there, getting to discovery is kind of the main thing. Most cases won't go to full trial once there's been discovery, right? Because both sides see the facts, they see the truth, they're behind the scenes, it's not public. They can all see the same data. So what's going to happen is you're going to have an overwhelming data. And I mean, that's the victory. So I'm not saying that there's not a lot of hard work ahead. There is. They're not going to give in at the moment. But after discovery, they're in kind of a bad spot.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's a lot of data, right? Because I mean, they're required to, maintain these vaccine records. So, we need to, figure out how many vaccines were administered throughout their huge healthcare system and how many of those individuals ended up then getting hospitalized. Even if we just talk about inpatient admissions for COVID-19, right? Because that's the easiest one, right? If we just, I mean, that's thousands of patients potentially. And then if we talk about the myo and the pericarditis and, any kind of heart attacks, blood clots, I mean, transverse myelitis, there's all kinds of things, or even, somebody goes to the ER because their shoulder hurts or is blown up after the vaccine. Those are all reportable events that should have been filed. And if they're not, and they can't produce the VAERS report, well, that's
The
a
other
check
aspect to this that's actually super interesting. So the I don't know the rules like you do. I don't is there an obligation on the facility to report, or is it just on the provider? On the facility too?
No, on the facility. So the program participation agreement basically says that the healthcare organization, so that would be the chief medical officer, the chief financial officer, the COO, operating officer of Rochester Regional Health, sign that anyone, it basically says all people involved under their organization, under the umbrella, are part of this agreement. So if
Right.
you're signing for your organization,
No, what
your
I was
entire organization.
yeah, what I was getting at is that I wonder how much, if it's even relevant, the act of suppression, like the fact that they actively tried to suppress you from doing it. That's only, I guess, that's not even the biggest part. That's like a small part of it. I would be super interested, Deb, in if you think, I don't know if you lawyers thought about this or if you thought about this, but it seems logical to you that Rochester was suppressing this at the time because we saw that the whole world was suppressing it. But I'm telling you, there's going to be a communication from someone at the, I don't know if it would be the CDC or Big Pharma, I don't know, that communicated with the CMO and the chief financial officer. Because on their own, they don't really care. You know what I mean? Like they're
Mhm,
not like
mhm.
malicious, malevolent people, but someone above them has told them, quiet her down. I know that in my case, the biggest payer at our hospital at the time, it wasn't a Kaiser hospital, but it was a Kaiser contracted facility. So Kaiser head called my chief medical officer and told him directly, make her stop prescribing early treatment. Like, this is crazy. My chief medical officer liked me. Like, he had no problem with me. So I'm just wondering if, when you do discovery, if you can see the communications that the chiefs were getting from above them, like to
I'm sure that,
specifically
yeah,
request
that's
that.
a great point. And I think that's going to be one of the things we're going to ask, because I agree. Because obviously the higher powers that be knew, right? I mean, Pfizer knew, Moderna knew, the CDC, the
Somebody
FDA.
pressured somebody pressured your
Sure.
governance of Rochester Regional Center to not comply with the law. Somebody high up at a chief level at your facility knew they were breaking the rule. They didn't think it was gonna backfire on them, but they knew. So they wouldn't have gone out of their way to stop you, right? They would have been like, "Oh, just let her do it, whatever." But somebody told them to make you quiet. Like, on do you understand what I'm saying? Like, on their own, it's not in their interest to have quieted you. You were in an area that really depended upon you. You had a great reputation. You were a leadership position. It's hard to get good hospitalists right? It's difficult. So on their own, they wouldn't have done this, Deb. There's somebody that pressured them. And I think that would be very interesting. But if you don't specifically ask for it, maybe you wouldn't find it. It'll be in emails. It'll be some phone call logs, something that happened in 21 to the Chiefs. They were pressured.
Okay. That's
Just put it
really
on the list.
interesting.
Put it on the wish list.
I'm going to
It
put it
right
on the wish list. Absolutely.
on the wish list.
Yeah.
And it's good for the medical center too, because if they can say who pressured them, and it might come out in a deposition. In other words, it's illogical. I'm pointing out the illogical nature
Yeah,
of,
why would they care, right? Some
yeah,
small fry
it's
PA
actually
just
against
starts.
their it's against
Yeah.
their interest. It's against their interest to lose a good doctor. Like, it's
Mhm.
against their interest. So this is utterly fascinating. So what are the next legal steps? So you're going into discovery. That's months and months, I assume.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there a
Yeah,
deadline beyond which, like, discovery has to be finished, like the next legal?
we don't have that yet, because our first meeting, with the judge and the magistrate to kind of determine the timeline is coming up. So once we have that, we'll have exact dates for the public on how this is going to proceed.
And very, very interesting. This has
Yeah.
been amazing. So, the reason we do the Gold Report is we want to inspire people to be just kind of more bold and active in their own life, give them courage. So we love to have people who've done something in their own life that seemed, it didn't seem so radical at the time. In fact, it seemed anti-radical. You're like, okay, I'm a great physician assistant and I'm taking care of patients and I'm following the rules. Sometimes that becomes the most radical thing, but we want to encourage people that if you see something going on that you think is pretty unethical, you have to do it. What do you think? And Dennis Prager asked me this in the beginning, like in 2020. Like, what do you think it is about you, about Deb Conrad, that made you keep pushing it and pushing it? And by the way, something you said, you reminded me of me because you were sort of activated. Like, you said something that made me think it only just made you more committed to saying it. So I've learned over the years that's not such a common personality trait or character. Was there anything in your, your childhood, your upbringing, your background, like why did you put, getting fired is very uncomfortable. Why did you,
Mhm.
what is it about Deb Conrad? And the reason this is an important question is I think everyone has a piece of that inside themselves. We kind of want to wake it up for them. So your
Sure.
experience is helpful.
I think it's just for me, it was what I stood for, right? And my when I think about back to my entire career, if you ask anybody on the street in my small hometown that knew me or had me take care of them as a patient, their responses would be consistent, right? That she's always, ethical, she's honest, she takes the time with you, she's caring, all of that thing. And when this came, when this happened to me, I did nothing different than who I always was, only it was never challenged this way, I guess. So I guess it's almost like being held to the fire of who are you really? Like, let's say you say you're an advocate for something. Well, someday that something might actually really come down and challenge you. And are you going to stand up for what you've always claimed to be who you are, or are you going to then just duck on the side? And I don't know. So I guess for me it's just I don't feel like I did anything different than who I always was, only this time it held me to the fire, right? Because I always stood up for patients and things. I am never a confrontational person, but I mean, I always, there was something wrong going on, I pointed it out and nobody ever gave me any issue, and they would say, Deb, that's a great catch. This was the first time that somebody, like, I don't know, ever experienced gaslighting or any of this stuff. Um, and I just said, no, you're not going to tell me. I don't know. It just
Right.
came so
Right.
natural to me.
Yes. You said it really,
So,
really well. Someday your values will come challenged. And that in
yes,
that moment, you find out if you are really what you say you are or if you're something else. And I encourage people to be who they authentically are. Most people do feel when something goes wrong. Can you also, and I always like to be very optimistic and hopeful because I think sometimes from the outside, things look so difficult and bleak. I've been attacked a lot, but actually, it's much better on the honest, truthful side. Like, there's no question. So, I want to make sure that you leave people with an accurate impression of your view of your life, right? Because you really were at a fork. It didn't maybe feel like that because you're like, I have to do what I have to do. I have to do the right thing. But when you look back, you're like, it really was a fork. And some people would look at that and say, oh my God, I never want to go through that. I don't want to be fired. I don't want to be ostracized. I don't want to be walked out by, people like were my friends, right? So they look and they remember that. For me, it's much better to be on the truthful side. There's no question. So I'd like you to share that with people because I don't think it looks the same on the inside as it does from the outside.
I can say this. I mean, because people say, "Weren't you scared? Weren't you?" And I honestly, I mean, yeah, I guess there was a little bit of fear as far as like, what's going to happen to me financially, because that day that I was fired was like I was canceled, right? Like they take your health insurance away. I couldn't get unemployment. Your job is gone. My husband's a stay-at-home dad. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But yet at the same time, I had a peace about me. It was like, no, I'm doing the right thing. And that to me means more than any job, any financial security. Having that inner peace, knowing you did the right thing, it's worth more than anything on this planet, in my opinion. And I never regretted anything that I did. Maybe I regret not getting more evidence, right? But I don't regret anything in the sense that how it all played down. Like I would do it again in a heartbeat, and I am grateful. And you're like, but that's my personality. When bad things happen, I always say that there is usually some sort of glory in the trauma. There's some sort of positive, all things for good, even in traumatic states. And if you look for it, it's there. So for me, I am so grateful to have been chosen for this experience. And I truly believe I was chosen. I was, for whatever reason, this for such a time as this, I'm a believer. So I believe I was chosen for this mission. And I am grateful because I have felt protected. I feel secure and comfortable in my own skin. Um, I know I
Excellent.
have a purpose, right? I'm here for a purpose, and it's
I love it.
beyond myself. It's the ultimate in a selfless act. And it's the most amazing place to be, really.
I love
Um,
it. I just want to make sure people understand that side of it. And I love it. It's very important that people hear the positive because it is overwhelmingly positive. Having gone through something tough, we're not minimizing how tough it is, but it is overwhelmingly positive. I want to make sure a few things. I want to make sure people know how to find you, how to reach you, like if you're on social, if you have your own website, anything. Just make sure people know how to find you.
Yeah, so I have my own website for which the public can follow the case. It's easy. It's I am debconrad.com, and we have all of the links to the filings with the court, and we try to keep it updated as we move along so the public can follow the case. We also, of course, have a donate button to help fund the case because obviously this we're just getting into discovery, and that's going to be very costly as we move along. But as far as my goals moving forward, and what I'd like to see uh, done as a result, hopefully, of this successful litigation, is that we can ultimately hold all of the institutions that failed to report these side effects liable under this theory, right? Because it wasn't just Rochester
Of
Regional Health,
course.
and like you said, there's somebody above that's directing all of this, but you should still be held accountable. Your pharmacies, that because again, the judge said that if whatever vaccines Rochester Regional Health gave out, they're held liable for. Well, that holds true for, let's say, a pharmacy. If a pharmacy administered a vaccine and then that patient got admitted to a hospital, that pharmacy is supposed to file that VAERS report because they billed, right? But the question remains, well, how would they know the patient got admitted? That's a whole nother level. I don't know how to answer that, but they're still liable and can be held liable. We also want to see training for the healthcare workers. Like I said, I want to see clinics start to open for the vaccine injured, these people that were harmed as a result of this whole process. And again, a reform in compensation for the injured out there. And we want, the Department of Justice had the chance to intervene in this lawsuit back when it was under seal, and they chose not to. And that was under, obviously, the previous administration. My hope is that the current Department of Justice will relook at this case and decide to intervene under
Right.
a new administration. That's what we are hopeful for.
Yes.
Uh,
There's actually a lot because there's
what
actually a
they
lot of
know
policy. No, there's
about.
actually a lot of policy things that have to happen that are bigger. I want to remind people it's not actually Rochester Regional Medical Center that was the outlier. It was Deb Conrad that was the outlier. So Deb Conrad, what happened at the medical center happened all over the country. All over the country, everybody was not doing this. Everybody was being suppressed. Rarely, rarely, rarely did you find an individual who's pushing back and kept the evidence. You might be the only one in the nation. It'd be maybe kind of interesting to see if there's another person like yourself out there who'd want to join. It's actually kind of interesting because obviously this happened all over the country. And I want to encourage people, you think in your job, in your daily life, you one person doesn't matter. Oh my God, one person can make all the difference in the world. You were paying attention, you didn't get quiet, and you took evidence. Holy cow. Can you imagine if everybody across the world, if there had even been 10 people like you, just even 10, like you could actually change the whole system. It would be amazing. I don't know how we'd find such a person, but I do wonder if there's another person out there like yourself. But
Mhm.
anyway, maybe the
Yeah,
DOJ will hear about it.
right. I mean, I hope so, because again, we're in a path in the United States right now. Where we're trying to restore some integrity to our governing bodies and our healthcare institutions and things. I mean, and what a better case to help, especially the whole vaccine hesitancy, right? What a great case to try to restore that, right? If we
Exactly.
can hold those liable for not reporting safety issues and for suppressing safety issues, it would make the public more confident that we are watching these things, we are assessing safety. Because right
Right.
now, I mean, working clinically, many people do not trust healthcare organizations. They don't trust pharmaceutical companies. They don't trust pharmacies. They don't trust the CDC, the FDA. It's the wild
Right.
wild west right now. It really is. And we need some sort of organization. And I think if the Department of Justice joined our case and paid attention to it and helped us along in this discovery process, it would certainly restore my trust, or
Right.
at least help to
Um,
anyway.
I, I
But ignoring it is not going to help.
I think it's certainly possible that they will come join to the extent that I sometimes have conversations with different people and it'll be something I bring up when I have an opportunity. Comes up sometimes. But so people to find you, it's I am Deb Conrad. Conrad.com. I am debconrad.com. I encourage people to donate to this legal cause. This is really important for everybody's benefits. We have to thank Deb Conrad for standing up for every man, for every Joe, every ordinary American. People I'm sure who know you know that you're a hero. I've been friends with you for 4 years. So as soon as I met you, I was sold. So that's fantastic. So we'll have you back on again whenever Discovery's gotten to a new phase and you've learned some stuff, maybe 6 months from now, maybe longer. We'll see. It moves very slowly. It is frustrating, the legal system, how slow it all moves.
Yeah, it is. I'm excited for Discovery. I am. I'm excited to learn more about what was really going. It'll help me to heal, right? Because there's a part of me that's broken, obviously. I mean, I'm very positive about everything. I try to always see the good in everything. But the truth is I am a little bit broken and have gone through my own pain and suffering as a result of this. But so I'm excited to go through the discovery process. And again, I want to thank you, Dr. Gold. I never did answer your question in the beginning of the interview when you asked kind of how we came to meet. And I want the public to know that when I had been speaking out and I was just this, this nobody, just trying to stand up for my patients, Dr. Gold somehow found me. And I don't remember how you found me, but she called me and said, look, I want to bring you out to California to meet some warriors like yourself, to give you some strength and just talk about some ideas that I have. And I remember friends and family were like, who is this Dr. Gold? Like, what if she's a crazy person and you're flying to California, you don't even know her? And I'm like, I know, but I know it's going to be okay. Like, I just know this is okay. And I mean, this is not me. I don't get on planes and just fly places, but there was something about you that I just said, no, it is going to be okay. I am about to meet some of the most amazing people I have ever met. And I did, and I have. And as a result, and so I went out to California and I met you and so many wonderful people that are part of AFLDS and Gold Care and this whole network of amazing warriors. And yeah, I'm so grateful. And here we are, 4 years later.
It is crazy. So yeah, the people who really show up are the ones I want to meet, quite frankly. So thank you so much for joining us today. People are going to be riveted, I think, by your story. They are going to be inspired, and they're not going to forget it anytime soon. And we'll watch it unfold. And maybe there will be some healing at the end of this. Maybe I can imagine what it would feel like if the people from my past life would acknowledge like what they did. And yeah, we can hope for the best. But people can find you at I am debconrad.com, and Godspeed, and hope you get lots of awesome information and discovery. Keep me apprised.
Thank you so much, Gold.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me on The Gold Report, where we inspire you to be 10% more courageous. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.